The auction yard stank of whiskey and rain. Silas Cole swung down and took in the misfit crowd that gathers when a man can swap shame for coin. Pens of bawling calves, a crate of bent tools, a bay mare with good bone, and a girl on a wagon plank. Wrists crossed with frayed rope. Her eyes were steady, her mouth quiet. The drunk in her shadow called himself her father. Take the mare with the mute, the father slurred. 2 problems, 1 price. She doesn't hear, don't talk, don't argue. Silas looked at the mare first because a man starts with what he can know. The hoof was clean. The head was right. He slid his glance to the girl. No sack, no pleading. A person waiting on the weather. The deputy hammered the gavel. Bundle lot, debt sale, speak up or step aside. Silas had hauled freight across bad country. He knew the price of leaving wrong things standing. $40, he said for the mare. The father grinned. Mare and the girl. I'm buying feed and a horse, Silas said even. The girl rides out free if she rides with me. That ain't the paper, the deputy said. Paper doesn't make crooked straight, Silas answered. Take 40 for the horse and be done. The crowd shifted like cattle when thunder walks. Nobody wanted the girl because nobody wanted the story. The deputy weighed sky and coin. Sold, he said, shorter than he meant, and banged the gavel so he could hear himself once before the rain stole the sound. Silas paid cash. He cut the rope at the girl's wrists and dropped the ends to the plank so the deputy would have to mind them. The father grabbed for the rein. Silas turned his shoulder and put the man back 2 steps with a calm hand. He offered the off stirrup. She stepped up lightly, skirts neat, no help taken. She did not ask for. He mounted, led the mare, and kept the town on his back trail. They rode the first mile in the rain and the second in that live smell after. The girl did not speak. She touched her ear, shook her head, then pointed at the sky as lightning tapped, far off hills. Silas watched the stroke, counted, watched again. She held up 2 fingers for minutes, flattened her hand for wind. He nodded. A man doesn't need words to learn. Name? He asked, shaping it with his lips and tapping his chest. She took a nub of chalk from her pocket and scrawled on his feed paper. E-M-I-L-I-N-E, Emmeline. He read. Silas. He spoke his name once, slow, like a stake driven, to the right depth. The ranch sat up from the prairie. A low house, a big barn, a windmill arguing with the sky. Inside, a table, a stove, 2 chairs that could be trusted, a bed made neat out of habit more than comfort. He set the coffee to boil and his hands flat on the table where a person could see them. He pointed to the bar across the door. Yours, to set, he said, and laid the bar in her hands. She weighed it, slid it into place, and some part of the room stood straighter. He found an old slate from days when teaching fit between storms. She wrote with a schoolroom hand, Thank you. He circled a finger to include the room and printed, This is yours while you want it. She lifted. Work? There's always work, he said. Feed, mending, watching weather. We split it by strength, and sense, not shouting. She nodded and the nod warmed the room. He showed the peg for her shawl, the basin, and the cupboard. Then he made his code plain before dark, talking slow so the shape of it read true. No hand without asking, no debt you do not owe. If you knock, I answer. She set her palm to her chest and then to the door bar, a sign he did not know but understood just the same. Lightning walked a ridge to the north. Emmeline pointed, drew a crooked line in the air, then mimed a roof lifting if a brace fails. Silas thought of the old south brace he'd been meaning to replace and smiled without, showing teeth. You hear the sky all right, he said. She read his mouth and the ghost of a smile answered. The storm would come. They would meet it standing. By then coffee was ready, and the night had decided to stay. He poured 2 cups and moved one within, her reach without crowding. On the slate she wrote a line before sleep. I will earn. He set the mug down like a promise beside it and said the thing that mattered. You're safe here until you say otherwise. Tonight. Dawn came sharp and honest. Silas was up before the rooster. He laid kindling, set coffee on, and checked the sky through the square window. The storm had walked off. The windmill ticked like a clock that believed in work. Emmeline rose without a racket. She rolled the cot tight, the slate rested where she'd left it. She tapped it once, asking what the day wanted. Feed first, Silas said, shaping the words clearly. He pointed toward the barn and the corral. Then fence, and a brace I was a fool to let wait. She nodded and tied a kerchief on. Outside, Dawn scrubbed the prairie. The bay mare flicked an ear and measured the new woman. Silas opened the barn. Air said what needed doing. Wet leather, old hay, a whisper of mold from the south wall. She laid a palm to the mare's shoulder. No fast. Hands. The horse eased. Emmeline checked hooves, slid a curry comb where mud had dried, then stacked clean straw under the leaky seam and chalked a square on the post to mark the trouble. Silas nodded. You see small first, he said. She wrote one neat word. Always, they. Fed calves with pails, Emmeline kneeling to keep a greedy nose from butting a weaker one. She moved quietly and straight, so the corral stayed calm. When a yearling tried her with a head toss, she didn't step back. She shifted just enough to take the shove out of the game. Silas took a hammer and a bucket of cut nails to the north fence. Top wire's lazy, he said. Emmeline brought staples and a post maul. She set posts while he drew wire, weight over, her heels, swing true. Back at the house, they ate cold biscuits with sorghum. Emmeline poured water and wiped the table. Brace, Silas said. He led her to the south gable, where the old crosspiece had started to bow. The nails were long, the grain wrong. Emmeline ran a finger along the crack and hooked the air with 2 fingers, a small sign he took for hurry. You in the sky, he said. We'll fix it now. They rigged a new brace from sound pine, notching it so wood would listen to wood. He asked for the adze. She had it in his hand before he finished the word. When they raised the piece, she planted her feet and kept the angle while he sank spikes. The roof settled like a horse deciding to stand. Inside, the air changed. Emmeline looked up and marked another chalk square, done and good. By midday, the heat leaned on them. At the tank, she cupped water to her face, then pointed toward a red cow grazing heavily and wrong. Emmeline made a slow circle with her finger, patted her own side, and blew out a breath. Calving? He asked. She nodded, then held up 2 fingers, and tapped her wrist. Hours. They moved the cow to the shade lot with patience and a loop of rope that didn't bite. Emmeline stood by the gate and used her body like a hinge. The cow walked where the hinge wanted. Doctoring later, Silas said. First, wire the west corner and mend that saddle cinch you looked sideways at. She tipped her chin. Saw, remembered, would do. Afternoon was a list done right. Staples, a new gate pin, 3 slats mended, a cinch stitched double. Emmeline wrote short notes as he passed. Rain leak, oil lantern, nest under step, toward supper. He set beans on the stove. Emmeline swept and then wrote, teach signs. He pulled a chair close, but not so close she had to move. He showed letters with his hands. A for fist, B for blade, C for the moon. She learned fast. She shaped S, offered it to him, then drew it into her chest, Silas, and tapped her heart. He answered with an E, made awkward, and then better. Emmeline on his mouth, on his fingers, in the room. They ate without hurry. After, she washed, and he dried. A wind line wrote itself across the west. Emmeline watched it, not afraid. She drew a jagged line and a tree, then an X over the roof brace they'd fixed. He understood. This time it would hold. They set the bar when the dark said it was time. Silas put the slate back on the table with the chalk placed tidily on top. Emmeline rolled the cot, then unrolled it again, considering as if a person might one day sleep easily without having to think it through. Good work, Silas said, shaping each word. We made the place better. She touched 2 fingers to her temple and then to the door, the sign again. He thought he knew it now. Thank you for watching. He stayed. Lightning spoke before the clouds did. By mid-morning, the air had that brittle taste a man learns to respect. The windmill slowed, as if listening. Emmeline stepped onto the porch and looked west. She raised 2 fingers, then one, drew a jagged line through the sky with invisible chalk. Storm? Silas asked. She nodded. On the slate, lightning, ridge, move stock. He had planned to finish the west fence, but plans are for men, and weather is for God. We'll bring the horses in, he said. Open the north gate. Emmeline ran as light as a jackrabbit. At the pasture, she placed herself where the bay mare would see her. No shouting. She angled her shoulders and let the herd find the lane that cost them least. They came in tidy. Silas dragged the corral gate and dropped the pin. Emmeline tapped the sky and then the barn roof's southern seam. Her hand cut a small circle. Danger. I hear you, he said. He checked the lightning rod his father had planted. The point stood straight, but the ground strap had pulled loose and lay like a harmless snake against dry dirt. He fetched a clamp, scraped the rust, and bolted the copper tight. Emmeline held the ladder and watched the horizon with the stillness of a deer that chooses not to break. When he climbed down, she set a hand on the strap and then on the earth, as if telling the current where to go. Thunder rolled a barrel over the hills. Wind lifted the shirts on the line and made them point east. Inside, Silas said. Ground out. Emmeline shook her head. She pointed to the big pecan by the east fence and drew a jag again, faster now. She took his sleeve and pulled. Urgency, without panic. They cleared the yard at a run. The strike hit where her finger had pointed. Light tore the sky and hammered the pecan. Bark flew. A new fire crawled at the roots. Silas sprinted for the pump. Emmeline was there with 2 buckets brimming. They refilled, threw again. The 3rd throw beat the flames to steam. The 4th made sure. Rain came then, as if the sky apologized. On the slate, rod saved barn. Fire takes trees. We keep barn. We keep the barn, he said. You kept me from running stupid. She wrote 2 letters. G.U. She tapped his chest. Then the ground strap. How did you know, he asked. You carry a hum, she wrote. Now less. He looked aside. I left my brother to bury our father alone, he said. Too far, too much freight. I sent a letter instead of hand. It hums. She set her palm to his sleeve. Not to fix, only to witness. Then she pointed at the fence where the pecan had shed its anger. Work wrote itself in their bones. They cleared splinters and dragged limbs before the ground turned to soup. When a limb pinned the wire, she wedged a post under the weight and levered it clear with a grunt that told Payne who was boss. Back at the barn, the red cow groaned. Emmeline stepped in, hand to flank, ear near hide. She drew an open circle and 2 fingers for hours, then made the sign he now knew for hurry. All right, Silas said. He boiled water, laid out clean rags, and found the carbolic. He took the tail when she nodded. Emmeline guided, steady and precise. When the calf stalled, she turned the small bones gently, found the path and drew life into the world with practiced quiet. The calf hit the straw with a wet ball. The cow answered. Emmeline wiped the calf's nose and offered it to its mother. Silas leaned on the pen and breathed. You didn't need ears for that, he said. She smiled with half her mouth and wrote, Listen other ways. Afternoon thinned. They ran repairs. Silas fixed the hinge. Emmeline stitched a tear in his sleeve. When the light went ready to fall, he made coffee and set the slate between them like a third hand at the table. He wrote, Thank you. She wrote back, We keep each other. He took her to the ridge above the tank where the prairie folds back to show the hole. The storm had thrown its tantrum and gone. Far off, antelope moved like punctuation. Everything out there has tried to kill someone I know, he said. It takes a stubborn kind of mercy to live here. Emmeline touched the lightning scar up the blasted pecan and then the copper strap, down the roof. Mercy, she wrote and added, is also skill. He laughed and tipped his hat. You'll fit, he said. You already do. She nodded and set one word on the slate. Together. Saturday wore its hat straight. Silas hitched the bay and brushed dust from his sleeve. The wind had turned south and warm. The road to town lay like a line someone had drawn to keep folks honest. Emmeline watched the sky, then the yard, then the door. She set the bar, lifted it again, and nodded. Ready. He pointed. Square, trade, bread. She tucked the slate in a cloth bag and tied it cross-body. On the porch, she paused, palm to the jamb, then to her chest. He didn't know the signs. Proper name, but he knew the meaning. Go out, come back. The square filled slowly and steadily. Wagons creaked in. Church ladies set pies on a plank, and a fiddler tuned against the noise. The blacksmith's boy rolled a barrel by bracing it to his hip like he'd seen men do. Sheriff Hale stood near the bank, hat brim low, the posture of a man who lets trouble come to him. Eyes found Emmeline. Some slid away, some didn't bother. She walked as if the ground belonged to anyone willing to work it. At the herb stall, she lifted a bunch of willow bark and a twist of horehound, wrote, Fair trade, on the slate, and counted out eggs. The woman behind the table blinked, then nodded, then smiled like she'd almost forgotten how simple a thing could be. A colt snorted at the hitch rail, whites of the eyes showing. Emmeline stepped to the side, turned her shoulder away, opened her hand, and waited. The colt's ear flicked toward her. She didn't touch. She moved air, and the colt decided. That was enough to settle. Silas felt a knot in his chest loosen. Public is where skill either stands up or shuts up. Emmeline stood. Cole, Sheriff Hale said, easy. That the girl from the sale? Silas faced him square. This is Emmeline, he said clearly. She eats at my table and chooses when the doorbar sets. Hale's eyes moved to her, not over her. Morning, miss, he said. Town's got a fiddle today. Don't mind it if it gets loud. Some folks only know how to talk one way. Emmeline dipped her chin, a polite acknowledgement without debt. Hale took the answer and let the moment pass. By the feed store, old man Kerr wrestled a sack up onto a wagon already listing wrong. Emmeline touched Silas's sleeve and pointed. Wheel. Wedge loose. Spoke cracked at the hub. She drew a fast circle on the slate. Stop. Then she walked straight for the wagon, hands up. Kerr froze because some women command without a voice. Silas slid the wedge right, set a block behind the wheel, and showed Kerr the crack. If that wagon had rolled, it would have spilled a man, a mule, or a child. Kerr grunted thanks, then looked at Emmeline like he'd been handed back a minute he would have lost. Sharp eye, he said to her and to the square. Whispers still moved. Unnatural. He can't be right in the head to take her in. But they sounded smaller against the scrape of a saved wheel. The fiddler found something warm. Couples stepped careful circles, boots scuffing the time. Silas wrote, Dance? On the slate and held it where only she could see. Emmeline smiled with her eyes and shook her head, then tapped her chest and his, then drew two parallel lines. Walk. They left the ring and walked to the edge, where the dust held sunlight in it. She pointed to the cookie table, then to a child, counting coins too few. She slid a penny across with 2 fingers and left before thanks could grow heavy. Silas felt the near confession rise, the kind that makes a man clumsy if he speaks too quickly. He took the slate and wrote, Stay. He started, to add safe, then scrubbed it and wrote home. Emmeline read it, looked at him for a long breath, then wrote, Want to, and underlined it once. The words sat between them like a small fire that did not need tending. They bought a bundle of chalk and a box of slate pencils. He added a small leather pouch and handed it over without ceremony. She tied it to her belt and tapped it twice, useful, not pretty. That was her sort of gift. Hale drifted by once more. Father still around? He asked, almost like the weather. Bottle's got him, Silas said. Bottle holds poor paper, Hale answered. If he stirs up talk, I'll remind him. The sun tilted. They turned the wagon toward home. At the last house, a woman stepped out, faded dress, jaw set. She looked at Emmeline as if measuring a puzzle that didn't fit any rule she knew. No words. Then she lifted a hand, uncertain. Emmeline lifted hers back. Not friendship, not yet. But the ground had shifted a hair. They took the creek road, away from where gossip flows easiest. Past the cut bank, meadowlarks stitched tea kettle songs into the grass. Emmeline tapped Silas's arm and pointed. Hawk shadow, rabbit hole, good clay near the bend for patching the hearth. He filed each in the place a man keeps the quiet things that make a life easier. At the ranch, the wind had settled. He unhitched and watered the bay. Emmeline set the willow bark and horehound on the shelf and chalked a neat square. Tonight, syrup. He grinned. If I come down with a cough just to taste it, dock my pay, he said with his mouth. She read him and rolled her eyes, then smiled despite herself. He brought a small cedar board from the shop and the awl he kept fine. On the board he punched letters slowly E-M-I-L-I-N-E. He sanded them with care and bound the edge in rawhide. She watched, head tipped, the way you watch weather you want to trust. When he finished, he held it out. She ran a finger over the letters, then took the board like a pledge. She climbed to the barn loft and hung it above the stall she had claimed, as hers to mind. When she climbed down, she gave him a look with more weight than talk. Something like, "We are starting." They ate beans and bread, and the first jar of peach conserve someone had forgotten on their wagon seat. Emmeline brewed a small pot of willow tea for a neighbor with room and wrote "Deliver" on the slate. Silas nodded. At first light, he said. They barred the door when dark asked for it. The whistle of nighthawks came clean off the pasture. He sat with a whetstone and his knife. She stitched a tear in her skirt that someone else would never have seen. He wanted to say you saved a wagon wheel, and you said yes to home. Instead, he wrote one word and left it on the table where she'd find it in the morning, partner. She set her hand over the chalk word, closed her eyes and breathed like a person who finally has room enough to. Trouble announced itself with lantern light. From the porch they watched 7 yellow eyes bob along the fence line. Silas set his cup down. Emmeline hung her apron straight, a small vote for order. Men reached the gate in a knot that had mistaken itself for law. A charcoal plank read, "Send her off." Pitchforks showed, one shotgun rode easily. Silas stepped into the yard and let the gate stay latched. "Evening," he said. "Y'all lost?" A man with hay in his beard took the lead. "Cole, we won't have her here. She ain't right, spook stock, knows things she shouldn't." "Fence holds better than talk," Silas said. Haybeard jerked his chin at Emmeline, calm at the porch post. "She doesn't hear, and she doesn't speak. That ain't natural." Emmeline wrote neatly on her slate and held it up. "I work. I harm no one. I stay." A woman read it aloud without thinking. A boy lowered the plank. "Words on a rock don't make her safe," Haybeard said. "What makes a place safe," Silas answered, "is men minding their own and helping when help is due. She saved a wagon in town and a red cow here. You brought no ledger of wrong, only fear. Bring proof or bring silence." A thin man's knuckles whitened on a pitchfork. "We heard she put her hands on a fevered child and the fever dropped. That ain't right." "It's willow bark and sense," Silas said. "Your grannies knew it before you forgot it." Emmeline walked forward, lifted the door bar from its brackets and laid it between herself and the crowd. A clean line in plain wood. She touched 2 fingers to her eyes, then to her chest, then to them. "I see. I mean no harm. I stand here anyway." Hales. "Horse clopped up then." He swung down slowly. "If there's a petition, I'll read it," he said. "If there's a crime, I'll hear it. If there's only fear, I'll walk it back to your porches." No petition rose, no crime was named. "Do you want to leave, miss?" Hale asked. Emmeline shook her head once. "Then she stays," Hale said. "That's property law and person law. Anyone who steps past that bar answers to me." Silas set the bar home. The modest, final sound carried. The knot loosened. The woman tugged the boy's sleeve and turned for home. Pitchforks lowered, lanterns, drifted like sparks changing their minds. Only Haybeard lingered. "You'll be sorry," he said. "Maybe," Silas told him, "but not tonight." Hale waited until the road emptied, tipped his hat and rode. The coyotes yipped once as if counting heads and finding none worth chasing. Wind swung the mill, then rested again. Inside, coffee had gone to leather. Emmeline wrote, "Sorry for the trouble." "You didn't bring it," Silas said. "You stood through it." She wrote, "Child, fever. Tonight? Whose?" She drew a small flower, Silas knew, from a faded dress, Kerr's place. "Let's go." At Kerr's, a girl burned under, a damp quilt, breath fast and thin. Emmeline checked pulse and tongue, shook powdered willow into warm water, thinned it with honey and cooled wrists and temples. She signed windows and air. Silas opened both. She lifted the blanket's edge to let the heat go and steadied the high mother with a look that said, "Stay. An hour is a long time when you count by a child's breathing." This one eased. Sweat came right. The girl slid into true sleep. Kerr's wife took Emmeline's hands and said, "We came with the crowd. We were wrong. People get scared," Silas said. "Then they decide." They went home under a clear, star-hung sky. At the porch, Emmeline set the bar with steady hands. On the slate, "Stay?" Silas met her eyes. "Stay," he said with his mouth so the shape was clear. She nodded, added one word, underlined once, "Build." "Tomorrow," he said, "we'll mend the east fence and start an herb bed by the kitchen door. If the town comes again, they'll find two things, a line that won't move and a house that means to be decent." She put the slate on the table and laid the chalk beside it like a tool done for the day. Outside, the windmill clicked. Inside, the stove kept its promise to hold the night. Silas watched the bar and its brackets and the quiet that follows a stand made without shouting. He thought of fear carried back to porches and set down like buckets, of a fever leaving, of a word that means more than shelter. Emmeline turned the lamp low. The house narrowed to essentials: breath, ember, the firm idea of morning. She wrote one last line and left it where he'd see it at first light. "We keep the line." He smiled in the dark. "We will," he said. "We do." Dust carried the news first. All afternoon the wind ran wrong. Hot, then gone, then back. The windmill clicked slowly. North, a black shelf stacked on the ridge, the kind the sky lowers when it means to take something. Emmeline stepped into the yard and tilted her head, listening with her bones. She tapped the porch post twice, urgent, and pointed at the barn. Chalk scrawled quickly on the slate. "Don't trust roof. Move stock. Lee Penn." Silas didn't argue with a woman who had beaten lightning twice. "Gate first," he said, grabbing halters. "Tie to the east fence where the wind breaks." They moved fast without making speed. Doors swung. Latches told the truth. Emmeline walked the aisles like a doctor, eyes catching what a man can't, name until someone points. She set a palm to the center post and closed her eyes. The wood tremored, nails thinking about quitting. She drew a frame on the slate, marked an X at the bad joint and wrote, "No time." "Out," Silas said. "All out." They pushed the bay mare, then the gray, then the skittish colt that hated the weather. Emmeline never yanked a rope. She made the space the horse wanted. Outside she tied low for balance and kept the knife ready. "Cut if you must," Silas said. She nodded. The shelf cloud came like a wall. Wind hit sideways. Hail peppered, then a sheet of rain. Inside the barn, the sound went wrong. Wood groaned in a tone too deep for ears. Emmeline grabbed Silas's sleeve and drove him backward. They were 3 strides from the door when the south bay quit. The wall shoved outward and the roof folded, slow, then all at once. The colt cried from under the lean-to where the drop had pinned it to the breast. Silas lunged. Emmeline beat him there, dropped to her knees in mud, and got her body across the animal's neck so panic wouldn't waste its strength. "Pole!" she shouted in her way. Both hands mimed a pry and jerked toward the fence rails stacked by the garden. Silas fetched a rail and a block. He sank the lever under the beam and threw weight on the long end. The rail bowed. The beam lifted, inch by grudging inch. Emmeline pulled the foreleg straight and spoke with her fingers along the jaw and shoulder, lying calm like a poultice. "Now," her hand said, and the colt scuttled free, belly low, breath scandalized. The beam dropped and thudded on the earth. "Count," Silas said. Emmeline counted nose by nose, palm on each wet cheek. She held up her hand. 5, then a thumb for 6, then another. None missing, none broken. She touched her chin, then extended her hand toward him. Good. The hour that decides whether something is salvageable or the story turned in their favor. They threw a tarp over the worst gap and roped what would still hold. When the sky remembered how to be ordinary, the yard did too. Silas leaned on the fence and felt the shake in his hands only then. Emmeline set the slate on the rail. The rain had blurred the chalk, but the meaning stood. "We saved what lives." He nodded. "Tools can be replaced, bones can't," she added. "Tonight, plan. Tomorrow, frames. Tonight plan. Tomorrow frames." Back in the house, he set coffee and opened the ledger. He drew a rectangle for the new barn, 2 feet wider, doors sliding instead of swinging, braces doubled where wind likes to push. Emmeline watched his pencil, then took it and drew a vent high, on the lee side, a cupola to give heat a place to go in storms less grip. She marked the post that had lain today and replaced it with 2 that wouldn't. Then she wrote, "Here with hands," and set her palm on the paper. Silas's mouth got ahead of his good sense. He wanted to write more than dimensions. He wanted to tell the truth his bones had known since the yard first tested them together. He had begun to count the day by whether she was in it. He didn't. Instead, he printed one word along the bottom where a man keeps promises: partnership. He underlined once. She read, tapped the line with a fingertip, then drew a small cross beside. Twice agreed. Night came gentler than the afternoon had warned. The stove kept its steady heart. Outside, the broken roof lay like a lesson. What fails can be rebuilt better if you admit why it failed. Before sleep, Emmeline stepped to the door and set the bar. She paused, listening to the space where the old roof had been, then wrote one. More line for the ledger's margin. "We kept them. We keep going." Silas nodded. "We do," he said, and meant it like a vow you could drive a nail through. The mother's scream cut the wind in two. Silas and Emmeline were fixing the tarp over the barn gap when it reached the yard. Sheriff Hale's horse came out of the cottonwoods with a running boy. "Tally's youngest," Hale said. "Wandered off at dusk. Storm scattered tracks. We need eyes and sense." Harvey Tally, haybeard from the lantern crowd, stood beating his hat. His wife stared into the mesquite. Emmeline walked the fence first, palms open, reading the night. She crouched, pressed her hand to earth and wrote on the slate. "He went east, then south, little boots tired." "How can you tell?" Harv snapped. "Because she listens," Silas said. Hale lifted his chin. "Spread slowly, no shouting. Keep a line to the creek." They moved like men around a spooked colt, deliberate, sure-footed. Emmeline led, reading bent grass and spider silk snagged low. She pointed where a heel had skidded on a cut bank and drew a small circle with her finger. "Wait." Silas slid down first, tested the clay and offered a hand. She took it to save time, then showed a scuffed place where a small knee had hit and a pebble had rolled. On the slate, he fell, stood, drifted. The creek talked to itself. Emmeline tilted her head for what wasn't there. One finger up. No crickets. East. She drew an arrow and paced toward the quiet. They found the boy's hat under a sotol, brim crushed. Beyond, a wash opened toward the river, a narrow slide into trouble. Emmeline lay flat on the rim and set her ear to the earth, tapped 3 times and waited. 2 faint taps answered from below like a far heart. She signed, "Rope." Hale ran a line around a cedar's roots. Emmeline tied a bowline quickly, checked it twice, and went over the rim as if down a ladder. Brush tore, mud tugged. She kept moving. Silas fed slack. 10 feet down, the wash broke into a dry pocket. A small shape shivered there, eyes wide, mouth working on air. Emmeline settled to her knees and presented her open hands. No grabbing. She tapped her chest and breathed slowly, showing the boy how to find his lungs. He copied. Panic surrendered. She wrapped him in her coat, checked his limbs and skull. On the slate, cold, scared, not broken. She looped the rope around him and signed up. Silas took strain and brought the boy into Harv's shaking arms. On the bank, the mother kissed mud and hair and everything she could hold. Harv looked at Emmeline as if daylight had just reached his porch. "I was wrong," he said, the words like nails pulled from old wood. Emmeline only nodded. She took the boy's hand and coached one more breath. In, out, slow as prayer. Hale settled his hat. "We'll file it small," he said, "but folks will know the right part. Get him warm. Sips of water." They walked to the family home, not as heroes. Delivery as part of rescue. On Tally's porch, Emmeline brewed willow bark with a shave of ginger and set the cup in the mother's hands. Harv stood crooked by the door. "We came with lanterns," he said to Silas. "You kept your line anyway." "The line kept us," Silas said. "Keep it tomorrow." Something stubborn broke the right way behind Harv's eyes. He nodded. He breathed easier than he had in months. Back at the ranch, stars scattered hard across a washed sky. The windmill ticked true. Emmeline stood under the busted eave and looked up, counting what they had. On the slate, "Boy safe. Line holds. Town watches." "Let them," Silas said. "Let them learn your name the way I have." She stared at the chalk, then wrote a single word that tightened his chest. "Trust." Inside, Silas set the kettle on and pulled the ledger near the lamp. He wrote a line for eyes or fingertips. "Tonight we chose each other's lives over pride." He slid the book to her. Emmeline traced the words with her forefinger, slowly, then wrote on the slate, "We keep doing that." He wanted to say the old hum had quieted, the house listened for her steps. He didn't. He sharpened a pencil and said, "Tomorrow we set the first posts." She nodded, mouth firm, eyes warm. She pointed to the door bar and then to the ledger. Both keepers. Both true. They barred the door. The lamp trimmed itself to a long, easy flame. Outside, coyotes yipped once, found their answer, and quit. Inside, they counted how a day changes a town and leaves 2 people closer to what neither had dared to speak. Before sleep, Emmeline wrote one more line and left it. By the cup. "Thank you for listening." Silas smiled into his coffee. "I hear you," he said, and meant every part of it. Dawn left no place for pretending. They started early when the wind still smelled washed and the mud hadn't remembered how to cling. Silas set the post hole digger by the chalked plan. Emmeline laid out string lines true as a hymn. The new barn would stand where the old had failed, wider by 2 feet, braced like a man who means to stay. Neighbors came not in a crowd but in twos. Kerr with a wagon of rough cut. The blacksmith's boy with a box of spikes. Harv Tally with his hat in both hands and a coil of rope he didn't trust himself to keep. No speeches. Work sorted pride the way a sieve sorts gravel from gold. Emmeline ran the level, eye to bubble, ruthless about plumb. She tapped posts until they listened. When a brace hesitated, she set her shoulder without drama, and the timber decided honesty was easier than argument. Silas matched her pace. They didn't waste breath naming what the other already knew. At noon, Tally cleared his throat. "We owe you for the boy," he said to the quiet between them, then louder to reach her eyes. "Thank you." Emmeline nodded. She set a cup of water in Mrs. Tally's hands and drew the sign for breathe. Slow in, slow out, because gratitude needs somewhere to sit. By afternoon, the frame stood like a clean thought. Silas climbed the ladder to the ridge and looked down. Emmeline's face lifted. She signed carefully, one palm steady, the other walking, then pointed to the ledger on the sawhorse. He came down. On the page, she had written, "We build what we mean." He wrote beneath, "I mean you to stay." The pencil left a groove he could feel with his thumb. He didn't look up. He laid the book toward her and waited like a man who knows a fence can hold or break with one more staple. Emmeline read it, once, then again, then set the point of the pencil on the margin where promises make room for breath. "Want to," she wrote. "Partner," she underlined. She tapped her chest, then his, drew two parallel lines close but not crowding. "Walk." Silas nodded once, the kind a body feels in its bones. He picked up a brace and a mallet because a life still needed tending. She moved to the far post and drove a pin home. The ridge held. Evening brought stew and the soft racket of tools being put where they belong. Neighbors drifted off with the good tired. Kerr left a sack of nails on purpose and pretended not to, as men do when admitting a debt would make it heavy. Tally touched the new corner post and said, "We'll come for herbs when the cough starts." Emmeline wrote, "Any time." When the yard quieted, Silas lit the lamp. He cleared the table of shavings and set the slate between them. "Teach me more," he said with his mouth, slow and plain. She raised her hands. They traded a small alphabet for big truths. Home, safe, work, enough. He shaped love and failed it. She smiled and corrected the angle until the word looked right. He wrote on the slate, "I don't know how to speak this clean." She answered, "You already do." She added with her fingers small and steady, "Patience. Choices. Every day." They walked, the new threshold in the blue that lives after sunset and before lamps matter. Emmeline touched each post in turn, palm flat, as if listening for splinters of doubt. "A decent life is skills put to tenderness," Silas said, the sentence sounding like it had been waiting years to be said aloud. She traced the letters on his cedar name-board and pointed to an empty plank by the door. He sanded it smooth and punched letters slowly, Emiline. She hung it beside his, level, no flourish. Names side by side made the wall read true. Before bed, she mixed horehound and honey into a syrup and labeled the jar in a clear school hand. On the slate, 4. Kerr's girl. He nodded. "We'll ride at first light," he said. At the door, she lifted the bar and set it down again. Not fear, a ritual. Then she touched 2 fingers to her lips and pressed them to the ledger's margin where their blunt words lay. Not a kiss, a seal. Silas banked the fire. "Will be talked about," he said, as if stating the weather. Emmeline wrote, "Talk blows. Away. Work stays." They left the lamp low, the house narrowed to what matters. Breath, ember, tools drying by the stove, the ledger opened to a page that held more than numbers. Outside, the wind changed to a kinder direction and kept going. They chose home. Respect arrived in work clothes. It came in the shape of Kerr's wife with the cough syrup jar washed and dried, a loaf wrapped in a towel, and a look that said a debt had decided to be gratitude instead. It came in Harv Tally's boy, holding a handful of nails like treasure and asking where to put them. It came in 3 women from the far end of the creek with chapped hands and a shy request. "Will you show us the willow trick?" Emmeline set a plank across 2 barrels in the shade and made a table out of plain things. She laid horehound, willow, a twist of mint, a small pot, a dipper, and a clean rag. She wrote in neat school letters on the slate, "Breathe first, water second, herb last." She pointed to one woman's wrists and showed how a cloth cooled the nerve and let the heat go. She drew a leaf and a measure with chalk, then handed over, a pinch and a rule, little often listen. Kids orbited, bold and careful, Emmeline crouched to their height and made signs slow enough for small hands to catch. Breathe. Wait. Thank you. A freckled girl copied with fierce concentration until the words lived in her fingers. The blacksmith's boy signed sorry to his sister for a shove he'd forgotten to apologize for and got a surprised hug that made 3 grown men smile into their collars. Silas watched from a step away, saw the town lean closer without crowding. The new barn frame threw a straight shadow. The windmill clicked like a clock that approved. He felt the moment take a shape he'd been trying not to name and decided to quit lying to himself. He went to the shop, cut a strip of soft rawhide and braided it 3-ply, small and true. He sanded the cedar name board he'd made for her until it carried light. Then he pulled the ledger and wrote, careful as carving, I love you. Stay and be my partner in full. He folded the page over once like a letter meant to be opened in a place with no wind. Sheriff Hale rode in easy and left his horse to water itself like a guest who knows where the dipper lives. He stood by the plank table and doffed his hat as if it were Sunday. Miss Emmeline, he said clearly, letting his mouth show the words. Town thanks you for the boy. Emmeline met his eyes and dipped her chin. Not debt, not pride, the plain acceptance of a thing said right. Hale turned to the little circle of watchers. You got questions about herbs or weather or listening, ask the woman who saved your children. You got questions about whether she belongs? Ask me, and I'll say yes twice. Harv stepped forward with his hat in both hands, a man who had found a better use for them. I was wrong, he said to the dirt, then made himself say it to her. I was wrong. You come by our place if you hear something the rest of us don't. Emmeline wrote one word, underlined. Peace. She slid the chalk to Harv's boy and let him draw a crooked heart that looked like a fence mended with what was on hand. A colt snorted at the pen, skittery as a bad rumor. Emmeline walked over, turned her body just so, breathed slowly where the colt could feel the rhythm and let it borrow her calm. The animal put its nose to her palm as if putting its vote on the ledger. 2 old men nodded like they were watching, a tight knot loosen without a knife. When the sun aimed itself down the western road, Silas set tools away and wiped his hands on his trousers. He found Emmeline at the end of the herb line, washing the last cup with care. He held out the ledger. She dried her hands, took the book, and read the sentence that had made his mouth clumsy all day. The page shook once, just once, and then steadied in her grip. She looked at him for a long breath, then reached for the chalk. Want to, she wrote. Yes, she wrote. Not large, not small, but in a weight that made the word sit like a post set right. She added with her hands the thing she had taught even children. Partner. Always. Walk. Silas took the rawhide braid from his pocket. This isn't fancy, he said, shaping each word so his mouth told truth as much as sound. It's what I got, and what I mean. Emmeline held out her left hand, palm steady. He slid the braid where a ring belongs. She tapped it once, testing the knot, then looked at him the way a person looks at a horizon she plans to ride toward, not away from. She reached for his hand and tied a single knot around his ring finger, too. A second braid she'd pulled, from her pouch, plaited quietly while he worked posts and pretended not to be thinking. He barked a laugh, more relief than humor. Hale, who had pretended to be studying a nail, cleared his throat. I'll bring the paper when you want it, he said. Or not. Law can bless a thing, but it can't build it for you. We're building, Silas said. Near the well, Kerr's girl chased the freckled kid in wide loops that avoided the herb table because someone had taught them to watch where their feet fall. Emmeline signed walk slow, and they slowed as if the sign had reached a place yelling never does. Neighbors drifted off in the gentle way of a town that has decided to leave well enough alone. Harv took his boy's hand and did not let go. Hale swung up and let one more truth fall like a coin where all could see it. Your father was in the saloon this morning, he said to Silas. Left heading south with a bottle instead of a reason. If he comes back mouthy, I'll put him to sweeping the street until he remembers why God gave him a broom. Silas nodded. Once. Thank you. He'll come softer, or he won't come at all, Hale said, and rode. Evening settled. Emmeline closed the herb jars, labeled each with a hand that made reading easy. She hung her cedar name board beside his on the barn, frame level with the new ridge. The two boards looked like a sentence finished without fuss. They ate at the table with their boots off, a luxury earned by the day. Emmeline poured coffee and set the ledger open where a breeze could read it if it wanted. She wrote one more line, beneath his. We choose each other when it's loud and when it's quiet. He pressed his forehead to hers. Not a claim. A promise. Outside, the windmill clicked its agreeable, and the frame of the barn bore the weight of what they'd said without a sound. Time rode quietly and sure. The new barn weathered its first winter like a fighter who learned to keep his guard up. Posts stood true. The cupola gave storms a place to leave. Emmeline hung mint and willow from the rafters, not for show. The room smelled like help. Silas watched the herd fatten, kept the ledger straight, and learned patience that a man can learn without getting old. Spring drew a clean line through the country. The garden widened. Children came to the porch with coughs, bee stings, and scraped pride. Emmeline set a plank across 2 barrels and made a school. She taught them to shape their names with their hands before writing letters with chalk. She taught them to breathe past fear. Listen with the heart, she signed, slow enough for small hands to keep. Silas mended tack and heard the old hum fade down to memory. When riders asked if he'd heard about trouble in the south pasture, he tipped his hat toward the porch. She heard it yesterday. On Sundays, Sheriff Hale read under the cottonwoods, then spoke like a neighbor. Folks brought pie, then stories. Harv Talley said his boy learned sorry and thank you with his hand and how it stuck better than shouting. Kerr's girl signed water please and got it quicker than if she'd hollered. A town learns by what works. One July, lightning tried the pecan again and found ground. The windmill clicked on, agreeable. Emmeline walked the pasture with 2 girls who followed her. She showed ant piles and shadi and where to set a boot on a slope. They asked if she could hear anything. She wrote, sometimes wind, always people. She touched her chest in theirs, and they nodded like a train had reached town on time. Autumn brought calves and steady money. Silas burned a cedar board for the house. Coal. Emmeline set hers beside it, level. People started using both names, without thinking. That is a kind of belonging you cannot buy. At the harvest supper, the churchwomen asked if she would speak. She shook her head, then looked at the children by the pie table. She stood, lifted her hands, and signed what she always signed. Listen with the heart. Quietly answered. Then she tried her mouth on 2 shapes she had practiced when the kettle sang. Thank you, she said, plain and careful. No one clapped. Respect does not always clap. Years rounded and kept going. The boy pulled from the wash-built a fence straight enough to quiet his father. Kerr's girl married the blacksmith's boy and kept Whorehound on her shelf so Winter minded its manners. Hale got stiffer and friendlier. He never needed a speech to make a point. Silas and Emmeline added a room wide with windows. She set a low shelf for small hands and put the slate there for anyone to borrow. He built a chair that didn't wobble and a table that did not argue with plates. Nothing fancy. Good. Some nights they sat under the willow and watched the river's thoughts. Everything out there tries to kill a man who won't pay attention, Silas said. Emmeline signed. Mercy is also skill, and he nodded. He counted, the day by her steps on the porch. Once a stranger rode in with the drunk who claimed to be her father. Hale put a broom in the man's hand and told him to sweep. He glanced at Emmeline, then the street. She signed peace and turned back to a child learning the alphabet. The broom did its work. So did she. When the barn turned 5, children braided wild rye around the willow arch the town had raised for another couple and never took down. It made a good door for the living to walk through when they were ready. Silas and Emmeline stood there with dusty boots and eyes. They gave a mule to a widow and called it a quiet gift. This story made history. Hale said by the fence. Not the kind you read in papers, but the kind that changes how a place breathes. At night, if the wind fussed, Emmeline touched the bar, and then his hand, two keepers, both honest. In the morning, she opened the door first and let light have its say. They lived as if noise was optional and work wasn't. No one remembered the auction plank except to be ashamed of it. People remembered the barn that held, the children who spoke with their hands, and the woman who could hear a storm by laying her palm to a post. They remembered a man who learned to listen so hard that words became something extra, not something missing. The years kept rolling, quiet and sure. The place held, so did they. If you'd like more clean cinematic frontier romances like this, tap subscribe and like, so the next story finds you first.